Today we're visiting with Dan Kullas, a longtime member of Hope United Methodist Church. Dan's going to tell us about his involvement here at this Christian community and some of the things that he remembers about the early days at Hope. Dan, tell us when you first heard about Hope and you first visited here.
Well, we found my wife at the time, Jeannie, and myself, and at that time it would have been our 3-year-old daughter, Heather, found the church by drive-by. We were looking for a Christian home in this part of town. We just bought a house out in Cherry Creek Vista, and we stopped by for our first visit and our first worship in, I think it was March or April of 1979. We were greeted in the parking lot by Phil and Mila Chesky and their young children. And Phil and Mila got us all situated to get Heather comfortable in church school so that we could go to the worship service. And that started a long association with Hope Church. And so I will forever be grateful to Phil and Mila for that greeting in the parking lot. It's the little things that are meaningful.
And they're still active here today.
They are still active. I sing 2 rows back from Mila in the choir.
Well, tell us what the building looked like when you first came. What were the structures and the infrastructure look like?
We showed up right after the opening of what is now the Fellowship Hall, which at that point was an all-purpose building. We had a small kitchen, we had all of the worship services there, church school was downstairs and rooms down in the basement, and it was really the beginning of the buildings on the site at Dayton and Bellevue.
Well, how did that work? There weren't any pews in there, were there?
There were no pews. We sat on, were they folding chairs or were they the ones that you pull off of the rack? I don't recall. I think we pulled them off the racks. We set up worship each week, and after being here, I don't know, a year or two, we actually built a structure in the west end of the Fellowship Hall that had a step up to get to the worship table and for the pulpit to be up there, and I think there were a couple of risers, maybe 2 steps for the choir, which at that point in time was fairly small.
But for meals or meetings, they would just rearrange all the...
You took down the chairs, took the chairs out of the row by row by row, the pew kind of configuration, and we had folding tables, and you set up folding tables and set the chairs around the folding tables, and that's where all the potluck dinners were held.
Well, in 1979 and early in 1980, Victor Schult and Al Brown were the pastors here. Do you remember them?
I remember Victor as a dear old gentleman who I think he came out of retirement to be associate pastor here. And Alton Brown was our lead pastor. Al was from Oklahoma. He was a good old boy Okie. He spoke plain speak, and one of the memorable things about Al is every week after you left worship service, there was at least one little tidbit that you could take with you into the week to make yourself a better person. And sometimes it was really, 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 really simple, but it's the kind of thing that Al provided a great reminder. And Victor was just his faithful sidekick, and anything that needed doing, Victor and his wife Ruth would tackle, and Al and Laura Brown also were just whatever needed doing got done.
Well, how did you decide then to become a member here at this church?
Well, I think we decided after we'd been here for a little bit over a year and a half, that it was time to formalize our relationship, and so in fall of 1980 we signed up for membership, and my membership has been here ever since.
Our records indicate October 12th, 1980, so you've been a member here almost 39 years.
Well, member 39 and attendee for 40.
That's right. And your kids were raised in this church?
Kids were raised in this church. That was one of the motivations for shopping for a church. We wanted to make sure that our kids would have enough basic information about religion and spirituality so that as they went through life and they matured, they could make intelligent choices for themselves about what path they would like to follow. So that was important.
Well, after Al Brown was here, Dr. Vickery was the senior pastor. You remember Dr. Vickery?
I remember 3 times Dr. Vickery. Every one of his sermons, he would open with a couple of lead-in statements, and then he'd say, "I'm going to make 3 points." He would list the 3 points. Then he would go through and expand on each one of those 3 points, and at the end, he would absolutely go back and reiterate, here are the 3 points that you ought to walk away with. He was more a formal speaker. He was a very formal speaker as opposed to Al Brown. I think my wife and I compared Al to a comfortable old fuzzy slipper. It was just, he was just great, and it was real culture shock to encounter Dick Vickery. And so everybody has a message. He had a different delivery style than Al.
Yep. Some people said he was much more formal, and I think your remarks echo that.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes.
At that time, we also had a couple of associate pastors, John Laughlin and Richard Lyon. Do you remember them?
I do remember both John and Richard. John Laughlin was young whippersnapper, very enthusiastic, very energetic. He went on from Hope Church to be the leader of Volunteers in Mission for the United Methodist Church. He ended up basically coordinating some of the volunteer operations in this part of the world, throughout the Rocky Mountain region and so forth. And Jim Llewellyn was a young fellow who wrapped up his training in church and went on to Price, Utah, as I recall, is where we dispatched Jim and his wife. And they were just a really neat young couple, and haven't heard from them in a long time, but I really wish them well. And Richard Lyon was a latter-day hippie.
Yes.
Richard was very easy to get along with. Richard went with us on a lot of the men's retreats and things like that. And he was a tall, lanky fellow. And one of my principal memories of Richard is we lost one of the members of the church. One of the members, Dave Pudlick, passed away from an aneurysm. And I will never forget Richard's comfort at Dave's funeral. And he said, basically, remember, we are the Church of Easter. We believe in life everlasting and the resurrection. He said, we'll all get to where David is. He just got there first. And I have carried that in my heart every time I lose someone who is near and dear. And I can't thank Richard enough for that wisdom. Have much more wisdom than his age would have expected.
Yeah, that's very nice.
That is.
Very
We'll
nice
all
memory.
get there. We'll all get there.
Well, Hope grew rapidly from the late 70s into the early 80s, and in 84 decided to build the big sanctuary that we have now. You were here during that time. Do you remember some of those experiences?
I was here during that time. I was not a member of the building committee on that project. We'll talk about a later project, and I was a member then, a member of building committee then. But I do remember that it was quite an undertaking. I remember going out, we had a narthex attached to the original building. We went out through the north door of that narthex, which was opposite the parking lot, and seldom ever used that door, but we went down that door, and that's where the first shovel was turned for the expansion for the new sanctuary, which is now where that shovel
Yes.
of dirt was turned. The new sanctuary was just, watching it take shape was really, really special, and it was a symptom of the growth of the church that was really, really positive.
Yep. And your kids were then growing into their middle school and teenage
Yeah.
years,
Yeah,
and you were involved with the youth and different activities with your kids?
absolutely. I only went on one mission trip with the kids. I went on some later mission trips with adults, but the only one that I went with a mission trip with the kids, and it was really kind of interesting because we had a mix. We went to Kansas City, Kansas, rather than Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas. And it was after some of the Mississippi floods, after a really hard winter. And the Mississippi flooded, and we went to help a couple of the residents to recover their homes and as much as we could, their possessions and things like that. What was so unusual was that I went as chef, and the ladies went as the crew leaders out in the field with the kids, running paintbrushes and hammers and things like that. It was, let's see, that was a unique experience. We had like a 15-hour drive from here to there in one day. We had two vans, rented vans that we picked up at the airport, drove them nonstop. One of the vans had a flat tire, luckily not the one that I
Oh.
was in on the way over there. So we sat and waited for a while the flat tire was changed, and then off we went, and we spent a week in Kansas City. Much appreciated. Sleeping on linoleum floors, but it was a well-spent week.
Well, how did you cook for the group that week?
We had the church kitchen, so we could use the church kitchen. We did have access to a vehicle. Um, Harry and Sylvia's daughter was going to school in Kansas City. She had a car. We could go shop during the
All
day,
right.
lay in provisions, and make sure that let's see, it was Al Lesser also was a cook on that trip. And Al and I would go out and we would shop during the day and come back and put together dinner and make sure we had ample supplies for the following breakfast. But it was fun. It was a lot of fun. It was hard work, but and it was hot, muggy. It was middle of the summer in Kansas. Thank you very much. But it was a really good trip.
You had mentioned as we were talking that as we moved into the new sanctuary, that Peggy Hansen and Merlin Binder used to do this routine to get everybody's attention. Tell us about that.
Peggy Hansen and Merlin Bender were the dearest senior members of the congregation, and they would always they somehow I think they were really self-appointed, but they took over the providing the announcements prior at the front end of the worship service. And the way they would do the announcements is usually they would start with a really corny joke, like a knock knock joke or something like that. Merlin would be on one side of the sanctuary. Peggy would be on the other side, and they would yell back and forth to each other and announce, "Hey, did you know the picnic's going to be?" And "Did you know?" And following a knock knock joke or something like that. They had everybody's attention. The announcements got across clear, and it was a fun part of the worship service was to have Merlin and
Peggy.
Peggy
Uh,
do the announcements.
well, Sam Day followed Dr. Vickery as the senior pastor here. Do you remember Sam Day?
I remember Sam. Sam came to us, actually, Sam came to our congregation after having been the leader of the local district.
That's right.
And he was also a very comfortable, very easy to listen to type of a speaker. He had many good lessons to share, and we very much appreciated having Sam here. When he left here, he retired from ministry, is my understanding, and he ended up down in the Tucson area and just south of Tucson. And hopefully they had a really good retirement.
And you remember his wife, Barbara?
Not so much. I remember Sam more than Barbara.
Yeah. Well, you said that you were involved with different committees, the building committee and others. Tell us about some of your experiences here.
Let's see, probably one of the earliest experiences would have been being caught up in the United Methodist Men's Group, which we haven't seen here for a long time. But UMM was being headed up by Dick Hansen, if I remember right. And that was where I met Fred Matthews. And those are the key faces that stick out. That would go way, way, way back. After that, Dick Hansen did a recruiting job, and I ended up on long range planning for several years. I believe we were the first ones to define a vision for Hope Church because nobody had ever done that before. So that vision has come and gone and has matured into today's version. But we did some of the planning, looking at demographics of who are our attendees and who lives in the local area, the standard metropolitan statistical areas that were adjacent to the church, and was there our goal was to see if we could define our neighborhood to the extent that people who were arranging worship could respond appropriately. So that was one of the committees I was on. Early on, way early on, it was back in the days when we were worshiping in the original building. Um, I was sitting next to a fellow by the name of Bob Arsler, who sings bass in the choir today, as do I. And Bob saw me pull out a hymnal. I had no formal vocal training, no formal music training. And Bob reached over, leaned over, and he said, just follow this bottom line of notes, which didn't mean as much to me then as it does now. So I tried to make a sound that looked like kind of low, go down here, up here, down here, up here. And that was where I found a true passion for music. Thank you, Bob. That was amazing. So I am other involvements. I'm in choir, have been for probably 30 years now, and actually owe a debt of gratitude to church choir at Hope Church because I also now sing, entering my 14th season with Cherry Creek Chorale, and auditioned choir here in the Denver area. And I was urged to audition for Cherry Creek Chorale by Ruth Most, who was a member here, and Sally Robertson, and Mary Witt to try to audition. And so I did, and they foolishly let me in, and that all started with the choir here. And I have enjoyed singing choir here through a succession of choir directors who have all taught me new things and new ways to sing and new things to sing and a wide variety of things. So choir has been a part of my life at Hope Church. I'm a scripture reader. Every couple of months I get to stand up at the podium and try to make as meaningful a message as I can come out of scripture for the day. I man the sound booth from time to time. I have the sole reason that I have a commercial driver's license is so that I can drive the Hope bus. I've driven several trips down to La Puente in Alamosa for the mission trip to La Puente, and I've driven a wide variety of support things for United Methodist Women and this, that, and the other. And I keep the CDL strictly for that reason. I don't drive a fuel truck or anything like that. My background is computers. Hardly anything you need a commercial driver's license for. Other involvements, I will mention one that wasn't my involvement, but was the involvement of my wife Jeannie, who headed up, I believe it was the first Christmas pageant in the new sanctuary, when the sanctuary was first opened. And I seem to remember some anxiety about the readiness of the facility in a timely fashion to take care of putting the kids up for the Christmas pageant. It worked, and it was quite rewarding to do that. So those are quite a few of the areas I've participated.
Several people have mentioned how blessed this church has been in its music program, and I want to thank you for being a part of that. That's been a real draw, I think, for people to come here and enjoy the music that we've been blessed with for many years.
Well, thank you. It's my honor to do that, to be invited to do that, and I have a motivator that is, if by my singing, even once during the course of the year, if my singing goes well enough that somebody gets a special moment in their worship, then every rehearsal, every hour of singing, and everything else has been made worthwhile just to touch somebody once
Yeah.
is worth it.
That's a real blessing to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you mentioned La Puente. Tell us a
Uh-huh.
little bit about that endeavor.
La Puente is an organization of 501c3, not for profit, based in Alamosa, Colorado, about four and a quarter hours from here. And they provide mission services for the San Luis Valley. They run a network of food banks that are supported by donations. They run a shelter for laborers. There are a lot of migrant laborers that move through the San Luis Valley on a seasonal basis. There are some veterans that are permanent residents down there that are allowed to stay for several months at a time. They provide, they have three thrift shops that are supported by donations of everything that you would find in like Goodwill or ARC thrift shop. They have a program that helps to resituate particularly mothers and children of families that are coming out of an abusive situation. They provide low cost or no cost housing and counseling and transportation support to job interviews, provide resume help, provide clothing of nature that is appropriate for interviews to resituate and restart family life for kids and the single parent. It doesn't have to be a woman. Could be a single dad who is also in charge. They have an outreach program now. There are a number of people that get attracted to buy a slice of land in the San Luis Valley. These may be people from the East Coast, the West Coast, from wherever, and it's 5 acres for a pittance. And so people will respond to a magazine ad or something they saw on TV. They'll buy a slice of what they think is going to be their paradise. San Luis Valley, where you're not in town and you're not on a ranch or a farm, is a pretty rough environment. The Sand Dunes National Monument is in San Luis Valley. It is dry. It is a lot of scrub brush. And there's a La Puente outreach. They have a couple of vehicles that go out in the middle of the winter time with a pickup truck with firewood in the back, with food in the back. They will sometimes give someone a lift to town so they can get some gasoline to power their vehicle or to heat their house. It's a real important mission that they furnish down there. And they also provide training. There's nutrition training to the kids in school. There are a couple of neighborhood gardens that they sponsor. One happens to be right adjacent to the local elementary school. It was developed there so that they could teach some of the kids from underprivileged homes what good nutrition can be, something other than fast food, where they can make real good. They make real good things for the cafeteria or for the kids that are involved in the program. They teach them about basic nutrition, things like that. That's another outreach that they have. It's just a real comprehensive outfit. And one of the reasons I got involved with them is before the first time I went on a mission trip there, we had a collection that was probably district-wide collection, because La Puente and their mission had acquired renters' rights in a building downtown in which they had opened a coffee shop. The building was about to be sold to a commercial outfit that was going to tear it down. La Puente would have lost their coffee shop, which was a fundraiser for them, as well as a neighborhood outreach. The notable thing was it was presented to us that grants had been found such that every dollar that we contributed was matched to the point of $7 that
Wow.
went toward purchasing that building. And my thought was any any activity that is that committed and smart enough to be able to put together that sort of a fundraiser is somebody who's really committed to what they're doing and somebody who also is going to be able to do a lot of good for the people that need it. And so that's how I started with my association with that. And so I value the several trips that I made down there. I drove last 5 or 6 trips. I drove the first couple of trips. Larry Ralston drove, and Larry was a real good driver and tour guide.
Yes.
That's what he did for a living, and we will miss him.
Yes, very much so. He just passed away.
He just did. Yeah.
Well, you're also involved in some of the Kenya missions.
I went to Kenya once with Saint Anne and
Fort,
who will always in
Yeah.
my heart be Saint Anne. I went once, and it was 2005, maybe. I went. Actually, my daughter went. Heather went about 3 or 4 years before I went. And I think that was one of the things that triggered me going was that she had been there and the things that Heather came back and talked about. And we went down there, and it was a busy time. We spent a week down there. We did everything from replacing the glass in windows. They don't have nice crank out windows or nice window sashes like we do. They have pivoted window frames that glass is laid into, and they have like a bar or a lever that has notches in it that they can catch on the window frame. So when they put the windows out, they put the bar down. Well, when the wind blows like crazy at night, those jiggle and slam shut, and all of a sudden you need to put in 8 new panes of glass. We put in 120, I don't remember the exact count, 120 something panes of glass in the elementary school, in the residential portion of the elementary school, and some of the classrooms to do that. We painted classrooms that were just drab, local Adobe color walls. We painted them into a nice tan so that all of a sudden you could see what you were doing in the middle of the classroom. We also put up, I never knew there was such a thing as blackboard paint. We put up blackboard paint to make blackboards on the walls, and also worked on a ranch that had been willed to the local district down there. We helped clean up a ranch house that was going to be used for future generations of the mission crews that came through, that they would use it as their bunkhouse and their headquarters. So we did that, and it was a good week. And we had a payback at the end of the week. At the end of the week, we ended up going to Masai Mara and had a day or two of safari at the end of the week that made it a nice transition to come back home.
Yeah.
But it was an eye opener. The people there are very motivated and very much in need. They were in deep economic depression. There were men all along the road waiting to flag down someone who maybe needed some temporary help, because there were no jobs for the men. There were very few jobs. A lot of the jobs had been agricultural jobs, that the major farms were now being all mechanized. So all the pickers weren't needed anymore. They had big machines that would do the picking of the French green beans and the this and the that and the other. And that left an awful lot of men in need of some help. And it was very, very eye-opening to do that. Yep.
Well, Hope continued to grow and looked to expand its offices and the classrooms. Were you involved in part of that, Dan?
I was involved in that. I was involved in all the way from picking the vendors, excuse me, picking the vendors that, and the architect before the vendors, picking the architectural firm, and talking with several of them and coming up with some plans. I was on the building committee. I was not the chair, thank you. But I was responsible for just throwing in my 2 cents and trying to guide the build out of what are now the offices, what is now the entryway, I guess part of that was the rough-in for the Friendship Hall downstairs, moving the kitchen around into a new location and providing new appliances, commercial grade appliances, and getting that all approved through Greenwood Village, which was itself a whole story. But it was challenging, it was fun, it was rewarding to get it done, and it's nice to know that we have a comfortable home.
And that's essentially the footprint that we have now.
That is
the
essentially
building.
the footprint that we have now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service in
Oh.
doing that too, Dan.
I'm glad to.
But in 1993, the Pope came to the Denver area,
Hope
and Hope for the Pope had a program. Tell us about that.
I don't remember who we were. There were probably a dozen to a couple of dozen of us that when we heard that the Pope was coming for World Youth Day that year, we heard that there would be thousands and thousands of people gathering in a neighboring location out at Cherry Creek Reservoir for a weekend, in and out and in and out, a couple of days for the weekend. We being familiar with Cherry Creek Reservoir and the fact that it's a great place if you're a prairie dog, but there aren't a lot of trees. There is no running water. Where people were going to be is just in the middle of very dry, dusty fields, very large fields, and thousands of people at a time. A lot of them children, adolescents, and teenagers, and their adult group leaders, and quite a few. Actually, we saw quite a few clergy people too, Catholic clergy people. What we decided to do at Hope was to put together an unannounced program that we would be available for people who walked past that would be familiar with what we were doing. We rented a couple of fairly large, if you put sidewalls on them, they'd be tents, but they were really a pavilion. We had a couple of cots out there. We had minor first aid supplies, Band-Aids and first aid cream and things like that for blisters and things. We did arrange liaison with, I forget who put together the EMT group, but they were over at Cherry Creek High School just down the street. And if we figured people would be suffering from heat exhaustion, from dehydration and things like that, we provided water, bottled water. Early on, we had some ice cream that went fast, but bottled water and shade, which were really important. And there were a few people that we transported from here who'd made it back out either on their way in or more likely on the way out at the end of the day, transported over to Cherry Creek High School to the EMTs that were over there. We had just people with basic first aid training here and enough to be able to triage and know what it was we could handle, what we couldn't. And it was a very busy weekend. It was a very surprising weekend for some of the participants at the Pope's sessions. They walked by here and some were incredulous. They couldn't understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. And we just said that we're all brothers in Christ. You're here for that. We're here for you so that you can be doing what you need to do. And that was our motivation. And it was a harried, busy, crazy, really wonderful weekend.
But tell us about the size of the crowds or the people that came by here.
We had at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, there was just a continuous. Bellevue was closed to vehicle traffic. It was Bellevue wide, 2 lanes of traffic, pedestrians moving in the morning and moving out in the evening. Some came up Dayton from places to park down south, so the Dayton was fairly full. There were thousands, tens of thousands of people, I guess, out at the reservoir, and a fair number of them, by virtue of the street structure, came past here.
Yeah.
So a lot came past the high school too. So we were able to split some of the traffic at least with up at the high school.
We joke that the Pope came to Hope, but he actually came a quarter or half a mile away, but thousands of people came to see him.
Thousands of people came on our lawn, and a lot of them lay down and cooled off and then moved on, and that was what we were here for.
Yep. Well, after Sam Day left, we had a co-pastorate of Margaret Hankins and John Lee. Do you remember that
Oh,
situation?
I do. I do. John became a dear friend in some senses. Um, John and Margaret. Margaret was another refugee from the hierarchy of the church in the district level. Margaret came to us after she had been the leader of the district. And she was a terrific minister to people. John Lee also had a very gentle air to him and very supportive air and was very spiritual. And they both contributed a lot to the spirituality of the church.
But Margaret was the first senior pastor here as a female. Did you
That's
remember that
true.
situation?
I remember that that was the case. To me, it was virtually immaterial.
Yeah,
Is that the individual was more important than the gender.
yeah,
And Margaret did a great job.
yeah. Well, you've been involved in many things here over the last almost 39, 40 years. Can you tell us a little bit about what this church has meant to you and your family?
This was initially it was a place to bring the kids and ourselves to try to deepen our understanding and strengthen our faith. Over time, it became a place to interact with some wonderful, wonderful people through all the committees, through all of the mission trips and everything else. And it has always been a place to support us in our time of emotional need and physical need, um, and just support from people who know you and love you. Um, this has been our family. It's been a family with a capital F, and we have hopefully put in 2 cents here and there that have helped it to thrive, and has certainly helped us to thrive.
Um, Do you have a particular fond memory of Hope?
I guess my favorite memories would probably be, would not surprisingly circulate around choir. We have been gifted with a great number of very, very talented, in different ways, talented choir directors. And each one has been a great teacher, a great mentor, a great leader. And the choir itself has been a gathering of people. Their kids grew up with my kids.
Yeah.
We are,
Things that have happened here over the last 40 years, what would you like to see happen here at Hope Church in the next 40 years?
well, I see the changing winds in the era of spirituality and religion. I think biggest hope and challenge that I have for us is I hope that we can continue to provide support and worship experience that draws and keeps a whole new hope family. Um, Interests of the youngsters are different from what ours were 30, 40 years ago, but I hope that we can appeal to them and provide as good a home to their children and to them as I have had here at Hope.
The church is facing some difficult times in the way we treat gay and lesbian families. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I have very strong thoughts about that. I think gender is immaterial. I think gender preference is immaterial. I think Jesus challenged all of us to love one another as ourselves. And it makes no difference to me what someone's preference is, what their choices are. They're still children of God, as we all are, and are deserving of our hope and love and support, and keeping them safe and healthy.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of different memories you've had in your activities here at Hope. Have we missed somebody or forgotten something that you wanted to talk about, a person or a memory of a particular activity?
Let me see. Give me a second with my notes. I don't. I think we pretty much hit it. We've done Let's see. Oh, I was on ad council. I forgot to mention that. I was administrative council for a number of years. Um, we used to have spaghetti dinners. We used to have burritos.
Yes.
We had a burrito. What was he? The burrito boss. Burrito boss.
Dave Christensen,
Dave
you're referring
Christensen was
to?
a burrito boss, and many, many spaghetti dinners that the men put on for the ladies for Mother's Day or Mother's Day weekend. The whole idea was to give the ladies a day off. In fact, I still have hanging in my pantry at home. I have a thank you apron that some of the UMW ladies gave to some of the men who were the servers at the spaghetti dinner. And it was their way to say thank you for giving us a night out of the kitchen. So yeah, those are special memories. They're all special memories. This is a wonderful place and wonderful, wonderful family.
Dan, thank you for sitting for this interview and sharing with us your activities and your memories here. And thank you too for your participation in this community of faith.
Well, thank you for taking the initiative to put this all together. I really appreciate it, Charlie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.